The meeting is now resumed. Distinguished heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the international meeting will now consider sub-item B of Agenda 6, entitled Report of the Credentials Committee. Delegations have before them the report of the Credentials Committee issued as document A/conf.238/8. I now give the floor to the chair of the Credentials Committee, Her Excellency Anna-Karin Eneström, to introduce the report of the Credentials Committee.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Excellencies, delegates, on behalf of the Credentials Committee, I have the honor to introduce the report of the committee concerning the credentials of the representatives to the international meeting entitled Stockholm+50, A Healthy Planet for the Prosperity of All, Our Responsibility, Our Opportunity, contained in document A/conf.238/8. Having considered the credentials of the representatives at its meeting on 2nd June 2022, the Credentials Committee adopted, without a vote, a resolution accepted the credentials. The committee also recommended that the international meeting, the adoption of the draft resolution concerning credentials of representative to the international meeting contained in paragraph 16 of the report of the committee. I would like to note that after the meeting of the Credentials Committee, formal credentials were received by the Secretary General from Costa Rica, Croatia, Cuba, Czech Republic, Egypt, Ethiopia, Hungary, India, Latvia, Malta, San Marino, Seychelles, Sri Lanka, Togo, Trinidad and Tobago, and Zimbabwe. The international meeting may wish to accept the additional credentials submitted after the meeting of the Credentials Committee. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to the members of the committee and to the Secretariat for facilitating our work. I thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I thank the chair of the Credentials Committee. May I take it that the international meeting wishes to adopt the draft resolution entitled Credentials of Representatives to the international meeting entitled Stockholm+50, A Healthy Planet for the Prosperity of All, Our Responsibility, Our Opportunity, recommended by the committee in paragraph 16 of its report, and accept the additional credentials which were mentioned by the chair of the committee? I hear no objection. It's so decided. The international meeting has thus concluded its consideration of sub-item B of Agenda Item 6 and of Agenda Item 6 as a whole. Outcome of the international meeting. Item 9. Distinguished heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the international meeting will now consider Agenda Item 9 entitled Outcome of the International Meeting. Pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 75/326, under this item, the meeting will hear summaries of the 3 leadership dialogues held over the past 2 days, as well as a summary of the discussions of the international meeting that myself and His Excellency Keriako Tobiko, Minister of Environment and Forestry of Kenya, will present on behalf of the presidents of the international meeting. We will begin by hearing summaries of the leadership dialogues. The 3 leadership dialogues were held under various themes and gave rise to lively and thought-provoking discussions. I would like to extend my warm congratulations to the respective co-chairs, as well as to the moderator, Nosifo Sahabalala, for their outstanding facilitation of the dialogues. I now invite His Excellency Kyriako Tobiko to assume the proceedings of the international meeting.
Thank you so very much, Co-Chair. Leadership Dialogue 1. I now invite to the lantern His Excellency Gustavo Rafael Manrique Miranda, Ministry of Environment, Water and Ecological Transition of Ecuador, and co-chair of Leadership Dialogue 1 on the theme reflecting on the urgent need for actions to achieve a healthy planet and prosperity for all, to present a summary of the dialogue. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do the delivery in Spanish so you can get your equipment.
Distinguished heads of state and government, distinguished ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here representing Ecuador and Canada. We were the vice chairs for the Leadership Dialogue 1, which had key messages and recommendations for urgent actions to achieve a healthy planet and prosperity for all. With Minister Gilbo, it was a pleasure to co-lead the Leadership Dialogue number 1. I'm going to go through the comments which came out of this very productive dialogue. First of all, we all agree that we must change the way in which we negotiate and the way in which we do business. No business as usual. We need to change our human behavior. A change of attitude, a paradigm change. We cannot continue to do business in the way that we are. And amongst the panelists, we must make sure that we speak from a position of faith, of hope, to give the opportunity to institutions to recognize our faith. It was said as well that 80% of emissions are in the hands of 50% of countries, and those who have the power to make the difference are seemingly indifferent. Then there was space for youth to speak. And here I'd like to open a parenthesis to ask us to welcome the Forum of the Youth as a way in which we can carry out the next steps. Youth, the young people said, we require multilateralism from west to east, north to south, but it shouldn't be costly. It should be based on donations at low cost, which will accelerate change. We spoke as well about including youth, that we must change the model and give much more weight to women and their role. We also agreed that the results of IPCC cannot be questioned by anyone. This is pure mathematics, pure physics, completely trustworthy and reliable. IPCC is the guide that we need to follow in order to effect the changes which are necessary. In our forum as well, we had representation of the communities, the local communities and indigenous peoples, and we agreed that all of the people, and it doesn't matter what their geographical status is or socioeconomic level, but indigenous peoples have shown us that they have known how to generate their development through maintenance, guardianship, and protection of their ancestral resources. those people from the indigenous peoples and local communities must be part of the solution with all of their ancestral knowledge. We agreed that the main enemy of deforestation is poverty. Human beings did not fall from a tree. It's not a fight between human beings and forests. We cut down trees because it's a way in order to live, to gain some income, or to buy some food, or to heat food. So it's not a fight between humans and nature. The solution is in the generation of work and of income. And that's how we would be able to combat such environmental problems as deforestation. Another point was that Costa Rica, Norway, and United Kingdom are sure that the future will be positive and that we will have a planet that is positive in terms of nature and resources, that is socially inclusive. It will be a planet where the genders are equal, and the new money of the world will be the conservation mechanisms, the new currency. We don't need 8 billion environmental fighters who are perfect, but we need those same number of people, even if they're imperfect.
I thank the co-chair for his statement.
Leadership Dialogue 2. I now invite to the podium the Langton, His Excellency Ambassador Tri Thayat, Director General for Multilateral Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia and co-chair of Leadership Dialogue 2 on the theme Achieving a Sustainable and Inclusive Recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, to present a summary of the dialogue. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the road we forged to get here has been long and fruitful. The informal working group meetings and the preparatory meeting have inspired today's Leadership Dialogue 2. I'll concentrate my conclusions on 8 pertinent messages which I and Minister Kemke have heard during today's discussion. First, the importance of strengthening the global value chain to ensure a resilient global economy. This includes creating access to and enhancing capacities of the small and medium enterprises in developing countries, small island developing states, and least developed countries. Second, the role of sustainable consumption and production and circular economy in accelerating the transformation of global value chains. We heard with interest the recommendation to establish a global dialogue on sustainable consumption and production that could lead to a global roadmap on circular economy for all stakeholders. Third, businesses are the forefront in driving the shift to circularity. This could be supported by a global circularity protocol to set clear targets and track progress through a transparency mechanism. Fourth, the influence of consumers in transforming global value chains. They should have access to relevant information in order to make sustainable consumer choices. Fifth, the importance that the food sector plays for sustainability and also as part of the solutions for overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic, that this will require shifting harmful subsidies, increasing investment in sustainable practices, and empowering smallholder farmers. Sixth, building back better must include green and energy transitions. We need real climate actions that walk the talk, not only mere commitments. Seventh, the vital role of women and girls, as well as the involvement of youth and the vulnerable in advancing sustainable development. This will require access to education, capacity building, and regulatory framework. The knowledge of indigenous people and local communities should be better taken into account. And lastly, 8, as the digital economy and solutions for sustainable development, including e-commerce platforms, have grown in importance, we need an inclusive platform to address the digital divide and literacy everywhere, whilst managing the potential negative impacts of digitalization, among others, on energy consumption. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the co-chair for his statement. This dialogue, Leadership Dialogue 3. I now invite to the London Her Excellency Yasmin Fuad, Minister of Environment of Egypt and co-chair of Leadership Dialogue 3 on the theme Accelerating the Implementation of the Environmental Dimension of Sustainable Development in the context of the Decade of Action, to present a summary of the dialogue. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to present now the joint concluding remarks that came out from LD3. I would like to start by congratulating Sweden on hosting and facilitating this important conference on the road to Sharm el-Sheikh, and acknowledge the support and leadership of Sweden and Kenya as co-hosts contributing to the success of the Stockholm+50 international meeting. Leadership Dialogue 3, entitled Accelerating the Implementation of the Environmental Dimension of Sustainable Development in the Context of the Decade of Action, dealt with 3 main key issues: how to scale up and mobilize finance for development, how to reform and strengthen governance mechanisms and ensure transparency and policy coherence, and how to strengthen multilateral collective action and revive the faith in multilateralism. Throughout the 3 informal working groups, the pre-meeting in New York, and today's leadership dialogue here in Stockholm, Finland and Egypt listened to a wide spectrum of ideas and recommendations. Some were very progressive, others were very conservative, and all were very inspiring. Allow me to share with you, on behalf of myself and my dear sister Emma, what we believe are the most important emerging key messages from the leadership dialogue. 3. 1. There is an urgent need for scaled-up action to achieve the SDGs and to align the SDGs with climate goals, especially the 1.5-degree goal. Synergies among climate action, biodiversity loss, combating desertification and pollution have to be created in order to address the environmental challenges in a comprehensive, collaborative manner, and with full respect to the MEAs that we adopted 50 years ago and their existing mechanisms. There is an immediate need to scale up finance for development, and we urge rich countries to honor their pledges and commitments to channel the $100 billion US every year to finance climate action in less rich countries, and to channel more financial resources to adaptation actions in an effort to balance adaptation and mitigation efforts. We must ensure that the governance structures be restructured and reformed in such a manner that facilitates the integration of multi-stakeholder mechanisms and indigenous knowledge and a know-how, as well as gender and age-sensitive opinions in policy consideration. We listen to the calls to acknowledge the risks that the continued use of fossil fuels possesses to the environment and for the future generations, and the need to adjust equitable and gradual transition towards more environmentally friendly and sustainable alternative. The young speak on the need to renew the faith in multilateral action, in science, and in education system. And we stand by them in calling upon all actors to scale up the integration of the climate consciousness in schools and universities. There is an urgent need to accelerate, thank you. There is an urgent need to accelerate technology transfer and transition to code development and routing of technologies in developing countries to build local and regional capacity to be able to design and source solutions necessary for a just and equitable transition. We reaffirm that sustainable future must be built upon the principles of justice and equity and must take into consideration the respective capabilities of all countries and the historical responsibility associated with climate change. At the end of this very successful international meeting, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude and appreciation to our esteemed co-chair, Finland, dear Emma and her team. The level of cooperation and understanding shown by both our teams since the inception is a true example to follow on cooperation between the North and the South. We deeply appreciate all your contributions and insight. Thank you. We cannot finalize without extending our deepest gratitude to UNEP, dear Inger and the team, and all the members of the Secretariat and the support teams, without whom this output would not have been possible. Finally, we gather to discuss accelerating the implementation, and in this spirit, I'm looking forward to seeing you all in Egypt in November of this year in Sharm el-Sheikh in COP27, the implementation COP. God bless us all. Thank you.
I thank the co-chair for her statement. I'm indeed impressed by the breadth of discussion during the three leadership dialogues and look very much forward to the more detailed written summary to be included in the report of the international meeting. And I now am pleased to invite Her Excellency Annika Strandhäll to assume the proceedings of this meeting. Co-chair.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I would recall that the provisions of General Assembly Resolution 75/2326, the two presidents of the international meeting were mandated to prepare a summary of the discussions with the support of the Secretary General of the international meeting, which is to be presented to the national meeting. Accordingly, I will present the first part of a summary of the discussions on behalf of Her Excellency Magdalena Andersson, President of the International Meeting. Key recommendations for accelerating action towards a healthy planet for the prosperity of all. In our capacity as presidents, the following key recommendations emerged from member states and stakeholders through the plenary and leadership dialogues at the Stockholm+50 international meeting. The recommendations reflect the resolve of the participants to urgently accelerate the implementation of commitments for a healthy planet for the prosperity of all in the context of the Decade of Action and Delivery for Sustainable Development, including a sustainable recovery from the coronavirus pandemic and taking into account the outcomes from the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly and from the special session of the United Nations Environment Assembly to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, held at the 3rd and 4th of March 2022 in Nairobi, Kenya. Since the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in 1972, the global community has adopted a wealth of multilateral environmental agreements, as well as the other relevant commitments, including the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. Fulfillment of the objectives and commitments of all these agreements would take us a long way towards securing a healthy planet for all. Stockholm+50 has emphasized the global interconnectedness of the environment and the need to collectively address the triple crisis of our common environment: climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution for the present and future generations. Stockholm+50 has also underlined the urgent need for bold and deliberate actions, as well as clear political will to accelerate action on these commitments, strengthen the multilateral system, increase ambition and solidarity, and set us on a credible path towards a healthy planet for all, leaving no one behind. The discussions during Stockholm+50 reaffirm the importance of local realities and national implementation, and the need for a combination of incentives and policies, finance and capacity support to achieve sustainable development. We have heard the following recommendations for actions to accelerate implementation. 1. Place human well-being at the center of a healthy planet and prosperity for all. Through recognizing a healthy planet is a prerequisite for peaceful, cohesive, and prosperous societies, restoring our relationship with nature by integrating ethical values and adopting a fundamental change in attitudes, habits, and behaviors to support our common prosperity. 2. Recognize and implement the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment through fulfilling the vision articulated in Principle 1 of the 1972 Stockholm Declaration. 3. Adopt system-wide change in the way our current economic system works to contribute to a healthy planet. Through defining and adopting new measures of progress and human well-being, supported by economic and fiscal policies that account for the value of the environment, investing in infrastructure, developing effective policy, and encouraging a global dialogue to promote sustainable consumption and production, and promoting phase-out of fossil fuels while providing targeted support to the poorest and most vulnerable in line with national circumstances and recognizing the need for financial and technical support towards a just transition. 4. Strengthen national implementation of existing commitments for a healthy planet. Through enhancing environmental national legislation, budget, planning processes, and institutional frameworks, promoting evidence-based policymaking, including by enhanced collaboration between academic disciplines and thematic scientific panels, drawing on insights and expertise from indigenous and traditional knowledge, and scaling up capacity support and development, access to financing for environmentally sound technologies. I now invite His Excellency Kyriako Tobiko to continue with the summary of the discussions on behalf of President Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the International Meeting.
Thank you, Co-Chair. 5, align public and private financial flows with environmental, climate, and sustainable development commitments through developing and implementing well-designed policies to repurpose environmentally harmful subsidies, redirecting, mobilizing, and scaling up the availability of public and private financial flows to support economic diversification and adopting recovery and stimulus measures, blended sources of capital, and de-risking instruments that augment financial flows. 6, accelerate system-wide transformations of high-impact sectors such as food, energy, water, buildings and construction, manufacturing, and mobility through adopting and implementing policies to promote circularity, resource efficiency, regenerative production processes, and nature-based solutions in value chains, and adopting frameworks that enhance and reinforce transparency and accountability by business, promoting just transition through support for impacted youth, labor, and local communities by strengthening capacities and skills for the creation of green jobs and for micro, small, and medium enterprises, and transforming food systems by promoting regenerative farming and fisheries approaches that provide healthy diets and minimize food waste, including investment in ocean economy. 7, rebuild relationships of trust for strengthened cooperation and solidarity through recognizing the importance of developed country leadership in promoting sustainability transitions, supporting capacity building and technology transfer for national efforts by developing countries to implement internationally agreed environmental agreements, taking into account national circumstances, including honoring the commitment to mobilize $100 billion every year for climate finance for developing countries, and enabling all relevant stakeholders, including youth, women, rural communities, indigenous people, interfaith groups, and local communities to participate meaningfully in policy formulation and implementation at both national and international levels. Mr. Morris. Let's continue. 8, reinforce and reinvigorate the multilateral systems. 9, recognize intergenerational responsibility as cornerstone of sound policy making. 10, take forward the Stockholm+50 outcomes through reinforcing and re-energizing the ongoing international processes.
You have to read this.
Sorry.
I think you have to read the whole text.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Number 8. Reinforce and reinvigorate the multilateral systems through ensuring an effective rule-based multilateral system that support countries in delivering on their national and global commitments, to ensure a fair and effective multilateralism, strengthening environmental rule of law, including by promoting convergence and synergies within the UN system and between multilateral environmental agreements, strengthening the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, in line with the resolution declarations, UNEP at 50 political declaration. Recognize intergenerational responsibility as a cornerstone of sound policy making through engaging with the Stockholm+50 Global Youth Task Force policy paper, highlighting the important need of building the capacity of young people to engage with financial institutions, recognizing the critical role of young people in environmental action, and highlighting that progress has been made on fostering meaningful youth engagement and calling upon the multilateral environmental funds to include youth-inclusive parameters in funding schemes, and further take steps to ensure ease of access of funds for environmental action for youth-led organizations. Take forward the Stockholm+50 outcomes through reinforcing and re-energizing the ongoing international processes, including a global framework for biodiversity and an implementing agreement for the protection of marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions, and the development of new plastics conventions, and engaging with relevant conventions, conferences such as the 2022 UN Oceans Conference, High-Level Political Forum, the 27th Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC, and the Summit of the Future in 2023. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Kyriakou Tobiko for this. A more extensive summary of discussions will be included in the report of the international meeting. The international meeting has thus concluded its consideration of Agenda 9, Item 9. I now invite His Excellency Kyriakou Tobiko to assume the proceedings of the international meeting.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Item 10, adoption of the report of the international meeting. The international meeting will now consider Agenda Item 10, entitled Adoption of the Report of the International Meeting. I invite the international meeting to turn to document A/Conf 238/L1 containing the draft report of the international meeting. In this connection, I will now introduce the draft report of the international meeting as contained in document A/Conf 238/L1. Chapter 1 of the report contains information on the organization of work and other organizational matters, which include information on attendance, the election of the 2 presidents and other officers, the agenda of the international meeting, the organization of work, and other matters. Chapter 2 will be finalized to reflect information on the statements made by all representatives speaking during the general debate, including by the state members of the United Nations, members of the United Nations specialized agencies, intergovernmental organizations, the United Nations specialized agencies, funds and programs, as well as by major groups and other stakeholders. Chapter 3 will be finalized to reflect information on the 3 leadership dialogues. It will include a summary for each of the dialogues pursuant to Resolution 75/326. Chapter 4 will be finalized to reflect information on the consideration of the report of the Credentials Committee. Chapter 5 will be finalized to reflect the summary of the discussions of the international meeting presented by the presidents today in keeping with Resolution 75/326. A list of documents before the international meeting will be incorporated as an annex to the final report. The draft report is submitted for consideration by the international meeting, and authorization is sought of the international meeting to finalize the report after the closure of the international meeting. May I take it that the international meeting wishes to adopt the draft report and authorize the finalization of the report in conformity with the practice of the United Nations. I hear no objection. It is so decided. The international meeting has thus concluded its consideration of Agenda Item 10, And I now invite Her Excellency Annika Strandhäll to assume the proceedings of the next phase of the meeting. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Distinguished heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the last item on our agenda, item 11, entitled Closure of the International Meeting, under which we will hear concluding statements. I first invite the Secretary General of the International Meeting, Inger Andersen, to make a closing statement.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, my huge thanks to the co-hosts, to the government of Sweden and the government of Kenya for their leadership in bringing us together to reflect on how we can tap in to the spirit of 1972 to tackle the crisis of 2022. My thanks also to heads of state and government, to ministers, to civil society, to non-governmental organizations, to indigenous groups, to youth groups, to faith representatives, to scientists, to judges, to entrepreneurs and businesses, and to UN colleagues. The tent that we began building in 1972 has grown larger, bringing more people under its roof every year. And from this tent, the loudspeakers boom loud and clear. It is time for action, period. Because a healthy planet is at the heart of human well-being. Much ground has been covered by these eminent speakers, as well as in the many panels and discussions. So allow me to drill down on a few action points that have resonated within these walls over the last 2 days. First, the human right to a healthy environment. That is indeed a human right that can wait no longer. Crimes against nature are crimes against people and are crimes against future generations. Those that defend the environment are not criminals. In 2020, 227 environmental rights defenders were killed for protecting the air, the land, the water we depend on. That is 227 too many. Secondly, reshaping our economies can wait no longer. We must zero in on high-impact sectors, food, energy, construction, manufacturing, mobility. It's all about circularity, resource efficiency, nature-based solutions. And the bottom line, decarbonization cannot wait any longer. Yes, the transition must be equitable, but not everyone can jump on the train at the same time. But everyone must be able to get to that station and make the journey. And also, making good on financing commitments and realigning financial flows can wait no longer. Money makes the world go round, they say. But so far, money has making nature go down. This has to stop. So friends, today I took the time to leave the compound and to listen to some powerful voices outside the youth climate strike in the center of Stockholm. I heard strong voices, impatient voices, frustrated voices. We must heed that call to action. There are over 1 billion young people in the world. The youth population in poor countries is expected to reach over 60% by 2050. As the Stockholm+50 Youth Task Force has made very clear, a sick environment cannot deliver for young people. We came to Stockholm 50 years after the UN Conference for the Human Environment, knowing that something must change. knowing that if we do not change, the triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste will only accelerate. Knowing that if we do not change, this triple crisis will make our world even less fair, even less equitable, even less prosperous. Leaders here and everyone have laid out what it'll take. And now we must take forward that energy, not in words, but in deeds, this commitment to shape the world. In 1972, the conference spurred the creation of the United Nations Environment Program, a program I'm humbled and proud to head. It spurred environmental multilateralism in the intervening years. The question for us today, in the wake of the 2022 conference, is what is it that we will now do? It is in our hands. Let's get it done. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General of the International Meeting, and through her, let me extend sincere thanks to the staff of the United Nations that have supported the work of the International Meeting. I now invite His Excellency Keriako Tobiko of Kenya to deliver closing remarks.
Thank you so very much, Co-Chair. Excellencies, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the concluding part of Stockholm+50 journey. From the co-president, let us take this opportunity to emphasize the richness of the debate, the variety of voices and the bold messages that have emerged and that we have heard these 2 last days. This demonstrates a genuine wish to live up to the potential of this meeting and build a future for our children and grandchildren on this, our only planet. There is no planet B. When we set out the plans for this meeting, we talked about 4 opportunities. 1, rebuilding trust for strengthened cooperation and solidarity. 2, accelerating system-wide actions to recover and rebuild forward from the pandemic and rebuild better and greener. 3, connecting and building bridges across agendas. And finally, to rethink conceptions and measures of progress and well-being, providing a new compass of collective welfare. This clearly shows that we didn't just come here to commemorate, but to build forward and better, based on the steps taken since 1972 and the lessons we have since learned. We came with open eyes and open minds, I must say, fully aware of the present challenges and crises, willing to accelerate implementation of our joint commitments and transform our societies. We mustn't forget the preparatory process. The informal working groups, the global, regional, and national consultations that have taken place, the preparatory meetings in New York, all this has led us forward and informed our work. These last 2 days, we have joined together around solutions to the triple planetary crises and the 2030 agenda. We have shown their interconnectedness and the opportunities that arise when we take a holistic approach and accelerate for both the people and planet. We understand the urgency. Accelerating is our only alternative. As Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson said, we need to do this not because we are kind, but because we are smart. And because this is our only chance to set in motion the transformative change needed for the future of the children of today and of coming generations. The power of global cooperation, of multilateralism, is an important engine of this transformation. Believing in and investing in the multilateral system means believing in a better world, a world that we build together. This was shown in UNEA 5.2 and UNEP at 50 celebrations, and it definitely has been shown over the last 2 days. The other engine of transformation is inclusion. It is when we join hands that we can really make a difference. Youth, women, indigenous people, and other stakeholder groups are crucial for our success. In this context, let me especially highlight the policy papers of the Stockholm+50 Youth Task Force. Tomorrow's leaders must not, actually leaders of today, tomorrow's leaders must not only have a voice, but also be listened to when decisions are made affecting tomorrow. Let me now invite my colleague, co-chair, to proceed with her message.
Thank you, dear Minister Koriko Tobiko. There are actually several conclusions to be made from these 2 days, and let us name a few. Business as usual is no longer an option. We need to rethink and redefine how we measure economic success and growth. We need to align all financial flows, public and private, national and international, with the MEAs and the 2030 Agenda. We need to mobilize and scale up financing. We need to work to implement the politically recognized right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. We cannot meet the triple crisis or meet the SDGs alone. The multilateral system is key to our success, and we must work together. Rebuilding trust and solidarity is key. There are many other conclusions. As we conclude the formal part of this meeting, we will take up on recommendations and make them realities. Our work will continue at home, since national implementation, we know, is key to our success. And in a multilateral setting, because there is still work to be done to reach a decision on a new global biodiversity framework, to negotiate and adopt a convention on plastic pollution, and to advance our climate commitments. We believe that we have collectively mobilized and used the potential of this meeting. We now have a blueprint of acceleration to take further, and Stockholm+50 has been a milestone on our pathway towards a healthy planet for all, leaving no one behind. With that, we thank you all, my co-presidents, the LD co-chairs, the HO SGs, ministers, all hard-working staff, everyone else, interpreters, well, you know everyone. We have still only one Earth. Let us realize the opportunity for a healthy planet, for the prosperity of all. It's our responsibility, it's our opportunity. With that, dear Minister, will you do it together with me?
Oh, yes, it is.
We close this meeting.